Ever get that feeling like, when something's set up, like with all the best intentions in the world, but then it still manages to go like totally sideways?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what we're diving into today.
Okay.
This whole thing with the Texas Home and Community-Based Services Program, a HCS, they call it.
Okay, yeah.
And, on paper at least, sounds like a pretty good deal, right?
Right.
Helping people with disabilities live independently.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't be on board with that?
For sure.
But then, hold on tight, because this new report from Texas Watchdog, it throws a real curveball. They're straight up calling it a system built to fail.
And you know what makes this even more concerning is that a lot of times Texas ends up being like a canary in the coal mine,
Right.
What happens there with these types of social safety nets, it often kind of gives us a glimpse into what might be coming down the line for the rest of the country.
Yeah, no, for sure. So let's unpack this a bit, because this report, it doesn't mess around. Right out of the gate, they hit you with this number, and it's a big one. Over 108,000 Texans all stuck on this wait list for HCS services. That's like, almost a third of the entire national waiting list.
It's incredible, isn't it? And it gets even more disheartening when you factor in the wait times, too. We're talking 10, sometimes even 15 years for families to get the services their loved ones need. Just imagine being told, okay, your child has to wait over a decade to get the support that'll let them really live their life.
It's heartbreaking. And you would think in a state like Texas, with all its resources, this wouldn't be such a massive problem.
Right, you'd think so. And that's what makes this whole thing even more kind of head-scratching. Texas has this booming economy, right? But they don't seem to be, putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to these community-based programs. The report actually points out that they're pouring money into these state-supported living centers, the SSLCs, basically institutions.
And those have, if I remember correctly, kind of a shady past, don't they?
Exactly. So not only are they costing taxpayers way more, or we're talking over $210,000 per resident per year, but they also have this history of abuse and neglect, and it makes you wonder, why prioritize a system that's known to be problematic when there's a better, more humane, and frankly, more cost-effective alternative right there? It just doesn't add up. You would think they would be jumping at the chance to embrace these community-based programs, especially with all that federal funding just sitting there ready to be used.
And that's another layer to this whole onion, isn't it? The report really highlights how hesitant Texas has been to fully utilize the federal funds available to them. This includes funding that's specifically designed to help transition people out of institutions and into community settings. So it really makes you question, what their priorities are.
Okay, so we've got a massive wait list, not enough funding for the right programs, and this reluctance to use readily available federal aid. Please tell me it doesn't get more complicated than this.
Well, remember the Medicaid unwinding process that happened recently? Yeah, that kind of adds a whole other level of complexity to the mix. Oh, right. The end of those pandemic-era continuous coverage policies, right? So what's the situation in Texas then? Just, give it to me straight.
Well, to put it lightly, it's been a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare. Since the unwinding started, over 2 million Texans, and most of them are children, have lost their Medicaid coverage. And here's the real kicker. A lot of them lost that coverage, not because they weren't eligible anymore, but because of procedural errors.
Procedural errors? What, you mean paperwork getting lost or families missing a deadline or something?
Exactly. The report actually calls out that Texas has a whopping 35% procedural denial rate for Medicaid. That's way higher than the national average of 22%.
So it's not even that these people don't qualify. It's that the system is basically tripping over its own feet and kicking people off in the process.
Basically, it's a bureaucratic maze, and it's having really serious consequences for families that are already, struggling to navigate this whole system.
And we know how important consistent health care is, especially for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Even temporary disruptions can really throw a wrench in things.
Absolutely. It means therapies get interrupted, medical care gets delayed, and then there's just the added stress on families who are often, let's face it, already stretched incredibly thin. It's a recipe for disaster.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the report, it doesn't just hit you with statistics and then call it a day. It actually takes it a step further by highlighting the human cost of this whole system that, frankly seems to be barely holding it together.
Right. It puts a human face on what can feel like this big abstract issue. It reminds us that behind all those numbers, there are real people whose lives are being deeply impacted by these policy decisions.
Yeah, there was one story that really got to me. It was about this single mom, Sarah, who had been on that HCS waiting list for her son, Ethan, for over a decade. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. And Ethan, he has this rare genetic disorder that requires, like, round-the-clock care. Even with Sarah working 2 jobs, she can barely make ends meet, and provide that level of support. The report said she actually broke down crying during the interview, saying something like, I just want what's best for my son. I don't want to have to put him in an institution, but I just don't know how much longer I can keep this up.
It gets you right in the gut,
Mm-hmm. It does, and that's the reality for so many families across Texas. They're being forced into these impossible choices, and it's often, it feels like it's a choice between their own well-being and the care of their loved one.
So we're seeing the toll it takes on families, but the report also goes into the challenges faced by, the healthcare professionals who are on the ground actually trying to make the system work.
Yeah, and it's rough. The report talks about the direct service workforce. These are the people who are doing the hands-on care, working directly with individuals with disabilities, and honestly, it sounds like they're being squeezed from every direction.
Overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah. And it's no wonder that turnover rates are so high in this field.
And then that high turnover probably just makes all the existing problems even worse, right?
Yeah.
Leads to more service disruptions, inconsistency in care for the people who need it most.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
It's like one of those, it's like a dog chasing its tail kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Where the system's failures just end up impacting everyone involved, from the families to the people providing the care.
Exactly. And what makes it even more frustrating is this lack of transparency, and accountability within the system.
Yeah, you're right. The report actually talks about this program, crisis diversion slots, they call it.
Right.
It's supposed to be like a safety net for those really urgent cases.
Right, yeah.
But it doesn't sound like it's actually working the way it's supposed to.
That's putting it mildly. These slots, which are meant to, prevent people from being institutionalized right off the bat, they're just incredibly limited. And to make matters worse, they're at the mercy of the whims of the state budget.
So even if you're facing this crisis, there's no guarantee you're actually going to get the help you need when you need it.
Unfortunately, that's the reality for a lot of folks. And the report goes into detail about, all the hoops that families have to jump through, mountains of paperwork, navigating this. It's called the Local Intellectual and Developmental Disability Authority, LEDALIO.
Oh boy, that sounds fun.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's like the system that's supposed to be helping is actually just creating more stress and delays.
Yeah.
And then on top of all of that, you've got those procedural denials that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, you mean the ones where it's not even that the person doesn't qualify, it's just some paperwork error.
Exactly.
That's unacceptable.
And it speaks to a bigger issue here. Texas has really been dragging its feet when it comes to, adopting technology that could streamline this whole process. There are solutions out there. Like, some states have implemented what's called ex parte renewals, where they're using existing data to figure out eligibility.
Yeah.
That way, families don't have to go through the hassle of submitting all this additional paperwork.
So basically like cutting through the red tape, making it easier for people to get the help they need.
Exactly. Common sense, right?
Yeah.
But Texas has been really slow to adopt these types of common sense reforms. The report actually states that only 6% of Medicaid renewals in Texas are being processed through these automated systems.
Wow.
Which is significantly lower than a lot of other starts.
Yeah. It makes you wonder why they wouldn't, jump at the chance to make things at least a little bit more efficient.
Right.
For everyone.
It's a head scratcher, for sure. And this whole, resistance to modernization seems to kind of contradict their stance on another potential solution, expanding Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
That's been a hot topic for a while.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Texas has consistently chosen not to expand Medicaid, despite the fact that they could bring in billions of dollars in federal funding that could then be used to, dramatically improve healthcare access for millions of Texans, including a lot of people with disabilities.
I actually remember reading in the report they were saying that between 2014 and 2024, Texas taxpayers basically sent over $36 billion of their federal tax dollars to other states, so those other states could fund their Medicaid expansion program.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
That's money that could have stayed here in Texas.
Yeah, and it really highlights, the missed opportunity and the cost of ideological opposition to a program that's been really successful in other states.
So, okay, just to recap, we've got a system in crisis, this massive wait list, not nearly enough funding, huge bureaucratic hurdles, a reluctance to, embrace solutions that could actually make a difference. I'm not going to lie. It's a pretty bleak picture. So is there any light at the end of the tunnel at all?
There is. The report, it isn't all doom and gloom. It also highlights some of the incredible work that a lot of advocate groups are doing. People who are fighting so hard for change, pushing for these reforms that could really move the needle on this issue.
Okay, give me some good news here. What are some of these potential solutions?
Well, one of the most impactful, as we've already touched on, would be expanding Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act.
Right. Although that would require a pretty big political shift.
Yeah.
So what else are we looking at? What else is on the table?
Well, there are a number of proposals, things like increasing wages for community attendants and other direct care workers, which, would hopefully help with the turnover issue. Also, streamlining the application and renewal processes to try to eliminate some of those procedural denials. And then, of course, investing more heavily in those community-based care models that we talked about, the ones that have been shown to be more cost-effective and, just more humane overall.
Yeah, investing in those community-based models, it just seems like a no-brainer at this point.
Right.
Considering what we know.
Absolutely. And the report highlights the work of some organizations that are doing great work here, like the Time to Care Coalition. They're really pushing for these reforms and advocating for those needs of these individuals with disabilities and their families.
It's really inspiring to see, people coming together and demanding better for their communities. It gives me hope.
As it should, because at the end of the day, this isn't about, numbers on a spreadsheet or policy debates. This is about people's lives. Mm-hmm. It's about making sure that everyone, regardless of their abilities, has the opportunity to live a fulfilling life, to reach their full potential.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Like, it's easy to get caught up in all the policy details and the ins and outs of how it's all supposed to work.
Right.
But at the end of the day,
yeah,
these are people's lives we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And they're the ones living with the consequences.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this really highlights why this kind of investigative journalism is so important. Yep. Holding a mirror up to these systems, holding those in power accountable, shining a light on these issues.
For sure.
That might otherwise stay hidden.
Totally. And Texas Watchdog, I'll give them credit. They did not shy away from asking the tough questions here. Mm-hmm. One thing that really struck me was how they compared Texas's approach to community-based care with what other states are doing.
Oh, yeah. The report actually points out that Texas seems to be kind of stuck in this, outdated mindset.
Really?
Yeah, they're prioritizing institutional care, despite all the evidence that community-based programs they're more effective, they're more humane.
Interesting.
In the long run.
It almost feels like, and maybe this is a little conspiratorial.
Sure.
But it feels like there's an incentive for them to keep things the way they are.
Yeah.
Even if it means that the people who need these services the most aren't getting what they need.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. That is a serious statement, and it's something that deserves a closer look because the report does mention that, financially speaking, Texas actually gets more money from the federal government for each person in institutional care compared to, those who are receiving care out in the community.
Oh, wow. See, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder, is this really about providing the best possible care?
Right.
Or is it, maybe there's something else going on.
It's that whole follow the money kind of thing.
Right, exactly. Follow the money and you'll find your answer.
It often leads you there, doesn't it?
It often does. And it begs the question, who really benefits from this system?
Right.
And who's paying the price?
It's a question that really sticks with you.
It does.
Even after, you put the report down.
Yeah.
You're still thinking about it.
It's something that we as citizens have a responsibility to be aware of.
Absolutely.
To not just kind of sit back and become desensitized.
So what can we do? If someone's listening to this and they're like, man, this is messed up. I gotta do something. What are some concrete steps?
Well, I think the first step is becoming aware, right?
Right.
Reading reports like this one from Texas Watchdog, staying informed, finding out about, what legislation is being proposed, what's being debated.
Right.
And, even just talking about these issues with friends and family.
Right.
It all makes a difference.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly. And once you've got that knowledge, then you can start taking action. Reaching out to your elected officials, supporting organizations like Time to Care.
Yeah.
Or even, if you have the time, volunteer, get involved, advocate for these families.
That's huge.
Every little bit counts.
Never underestimate the power of just making your voice heard, right?
Absolutely. Our elected officials need to hear from us, about the issues that we care about. Don't be afraid to reach out.
Well said. Well said. This deep dive, man, it's been a journey. We've gone from the depths of bureaucratic nightmares to these glimmers of hope that maybe a more just and equitable system is possible.
It's true. And I think it's a good reminder that even systems that start with the best intentions can really falter if they're not given the proper oversight, if they don't have the funding, if there's not a genuine commitment to serving the needs of the people.
Of the people that need it most.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it keeps coming back to this idea that we have a shared responsibility.
Yes.
To make sure that everyone has the opportunity to live with dignity.
Absolutely.
To have their basic needs met,
That's what it's all about.
To live a fulfilling life.
At the end of the day.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well said. This has been heavy but important.
It has.
And I really appreciate you, taking the time to break it all down with me.
Oh, of course. It's my pleasure.
So for everyone listening, be sure to check out the show notes. We'll have links to the report, all the resources that we talked about.
Yes.
So you can, dive in a little deeper yourself.
Learn more.
Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and most importantly, keep fighting the good fight.